Welcome to Grid Roundtable. I'm Joshua Burge, and with me are on the left, Matthew and Joe. They support using the red flag and or overtime. And on the right, Ben and Daniel oppose the use of the red flag and or overtime. I'm in the middle, neutral, but we will let all four debate and discuss their own opinions. And we want to hear from you as well, the viewers. You are all welcome to throw your questions or share your own opinions as well. Please do get in touch with us. But first, we'll let each member introduce themselves and explain why they stand with their opinion.
Very excited to be here. My name is Joe San Diego. Of course, one of the big things for me when it comes to motorsports, it's about having a good time for the fans and the spirit of competition. One of the big things I feel when it comes to competition, we don't want to see a race that ends under caution. If at best we could try to avoid the situation with rules in place. How do we get there? That's something I think we'll hear from our other co-hosts, but in my opinion, I support something where we have one attempt at least for a green flag finish.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniele from Races Behind the Helmet. Of course, I'm based in Europe, so I'm mainly more into the European motorsport. So I understand that sometimes the rules are different from the American motorsport. So my position is not like hard-hedged. I understand that, and I agree that sometimes there might be different regulations from different championships. But I mainly oppose, from my point of view, as I mainly have been involved in motorsport in European racing, and I do not particularly. I'm not particularly used to the especially what NASCAR has started in this regard. So, but as I mentioned, I'm not hard hedged for a different kind of motor racing series.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Schneider. I'm the host of Grid Live Encore on Monday nights and also contributor to pretty much every other Grid show that we have. In some regard, I'm a fill-in host on Grid Tonight and been on the Women in Motorsports show a couple of times as well and the other Grid Live shows throughout the weekends. And I think it's no secret where I stand. I've put out a YouTube video on this subject actually at the beginning of this year. I think people, if they follow me on social media, know that I'm opposed to overtime finishes or red flagging the race with only a handful of laps remaining. And the reason that I am is just really for a number of reasons, and I know we'll get into that later on in the show here, but to me, it boils down to being yet another thing that was fixed in the world of motorsport that wasn't necessarily broken. Now, I understand that we're here for entertainment as much as we are for sport, but at the same time, I think a lot of times it depends on the drivers involved in these finishes where fans side and come down on this subject, depending on if it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. leading the race versus Kyle Busch leading the race and Dale Earnhardt Jr. in second. I think that might sway some fans' opinions more so than should we have overtime or should we not have overtime. But I'll save the majority of my arguments here for the show. But that's obviously where I stand on things.
Yeah, and for me, I am Matthew Bro. If you guys do see me, it's usually on Saturday at noon Eastern time for the pre-race or sometimes on Sunday, usually night for the post-race show. I'm on Joe's side a little bit when it comes to this. This is not a strong opinion thing I have, and I'll obviously discuss that more with Ben in terms of NASCAR, but I lean more to the having caution, having red flag, I guess, because as a fan of all motorsport, you never really want to see the race end in a, quote, boring way, and there's a reason why these are televised for an entertainment aspect. You got to get your money somehow. And you don't really want to really watch just a race end, red flag, yellow flag, rain, fog, you name it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's how I feel. But I'm very excited to be here tonight with all five of us.
Yeah, just in the middle. Just ignore me. I'll play moderator as well. Feels like I'm hosting a debate team at university. Anyway, welcome to you all. Strap yourselves in and let's get into it as well. First off with some comments as well. Auto Rocking Racing 94, cracking name as well, says, personally, it boils down to the incident at hand and how many laps are left. Look no further than the 2002 Cup Series when the red flag lap window was in full effect. IndyCar have done a decent job on policing how to handle a late race caution. However, it has impacted some races. Example, Will Power at Detroit in 21. That was the first race, of course, at Detroit. He also goes on to say, but to be honest, end it via was it advertised distance? Absolutely, yes. It was possible. I've got out my phone as well. How handy. Let's get straight into it then. So strap yourselves in and we'll go round the table. Starting off, of course, in 1995, which it was the first year of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series and the first to use a new rule where the race cannot end under caution. It was the first overtime rule in any of NASCAR's national series. The other series, the Cup and the Xfinity, saw the red flag displayed if a late crash happened. This was mainly used if there was still enough laps for at least 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 remaining green laps. At first, it was only in the short tracks, but it expanded to all tracks in the early 2000s. The first time we saw a red flag used in the 2002 Daytona 500 was when the red flag came out, setting up a 3-lap shootout. Infamously called Sterling Marlin, joined the red flag, got out of his car, pulled the fender of the car, and was sent to the back of the line, giving Ward Burton the win. But later, in 2002, fans pelted Daytona's Pepsi 400 with beer cans and cushions after NASCAR didn't throw a red flag when the caution came with 3 laps to go. So in 2003 and 2004, they set the rule there needed to be 5 laps remaining after the final caution if NASCAR was going to use the red flag. However, the infamous Talladega race in 2004 saw fans pelt the track and Jeff Gordon's car with cans when the caution came out with 4 laps to go. No restart, and Gordon just edged Dale Earnhardt Jr. Mid-July of 2004, all 3 series adopted a green-white-checkered rule. Since then, NASCAR has tweaked the rule for overtime here and there. The current rule is as many attempts until the white flag is waved. The white flag indicates the last lap, so the next lap ends it. The next flag ends it as well, checkered or cautioned, except for the All-Star race. Just, of course, ask Ryan Blaney. Ben, coming to you first on this table as well. We know you have been opposed to the NASCAR overtime system. What are some of the biggest problems you personally have?
All right, so there's 3 main problems that I have with overtime. And again, if you see my video, it's probably going to be kind of redundant, but I'll go through it all here for the sake of everyone. The first is perhaps the most important in my mind, and that's the issue of safety, and even just beyond safety, the issue of cost for the teams in regards to multiple overtime finishes, particularly at tracks like Daytona and Talladega. The most serious instance, I think we can all probably agree, hopefully agree, is the Daytona 500 a couple of years ago. That went into multiple overtimes, and we saw Ryan Newman get turned over on the last lap of an overtime finish, and obviously have to go to the hospital and miss a handful of races. Probably would have missed more than just the 3 he had if it hadn't been for the long COVID break for the pandemic, of course. But that was a very scary night for all of us. And while I'm well aware that can happen on any lap during the race, it was a freak accident. The more times you go through that process of having a late race restart with everybody turning the intensity up to 11 and trying to make these desperate moves as you're coming to the checkered flag of the biggest race of the year, the more exponentially higher percentage chance you have at having something like that go terribly wrong. But beyond just the issue of safety, like I mentioned, the more attempts you have, the more cars get torn up, the larger the repair bills are for the teams. We saw at the beginning of this season with the next-gen car, some teams were concerned about supply parts, and the supply chain was backed up, and teams were unsure how many cars they could have back at their bases, at their garage. So I think that plays a factor into things as well. It's always an expensive day at the track anytime we go to Daytona or Talladega. But when you have 3 or sometimes 4 overtime attempts, I'm thinking back to the Xfinity race this past summer as well at Daytona. It was an expensive day for many of those teams, even more so than it usually is. And I think if we even just limited it to 1 attempt, which is what it used to be, I think that would save the teams a lot of money, and who doesn't like that, of course. The second thing that I don't like about it is it's false advertising. I'll admit I was kind of bummed when the Indianapolis 500 ended under caution in 2020 after one of the cars hit the attenuator on pit road, and they didn't red flag the race because they said it's going to take too long to clean up. They just decided to end it. I understand that that's a bummer, but that's motor racing sometimes. You're not always going to get what you want. And the name of that race is the Indianapolis 500. It's not the Indianapolis 505. It's not the Indianapolis 525. J.R. Hildebrand can tell you it's not the Indianapolis 499. It's the Indianapolis 500. That 500 represents the number of miles in the race. It's not an arbitrary number that they just put there for whatever reason. And so when you go to the Daytona 500 on NASCAR side of things, and me watching the Daytona 500 for the first time in 2007 as a 7-year-old kid, seeing Mark Martin lead mile number 500, to me, if I had, had the knowledge of racing and, been old enough to form these opinions back then, I probably would have said, why is Mark Martin not the winner of the Daytona 500? And again, that's an instance where I think it's a popular driver. Who wouldn't have loved to see Mark Martin finally get his Daytona 500 win? I think that, a lot of times, like, Josh, you brought up the Daytona races in 2002, the Talladega race in 2004. The drivers involved here sometimes sway the opinions of the fans. But I think, regardless of whoever it is, that number in the Daytona 500 name means something, and that should be honored regardless of whoever's involved here. And the third reason, we run into the issue of start times as well a lot of times on this show. And, I know Josh and Daniel specifically in Europe, it's harder for you guys to join the wrap-up shows because the NASCAR races end so late on most weekends. The more we extend the races with these late start times, which it seems like NASCAR continues to double down on year after year, the later it goes into our evenings, the later we have to do these shows, the later of a night it is for everybody watching. And particularly when the race is on network television, you run up against the 6 or 7 o'clock news or whatever, the more likely you are to get bumped to a cable channel that not as many people have, and that hurts the television rating. So those are the three main reasons for me why I'm not a huge fan of ending races under overtime. But now I'll turn it over to Matthew because I know he'll maybe try to convince me otherwise.
Absolutely as well. Matthew, we know you support NASCAR having overtime to try and ensure a green flag finish. Why do you believe it's in NASCAR's best interest to have such a rule?
I mean, I think there's many reasons. And also I want to point out, I think for anyone listening at home, Ben's argument is a very great argument. So please listen to both sides. And if you're very in the middle, like Joshua is, just pick, because really, like, if you have something set in your mind right now, don't listen to just that opinion, because even though I am different from Ben in terms of this, Ben just made some very great points that had me thinking while he was talking. But for me personally, I think one big thing is definitely the entertainment values, which I mentioned. I know motorsport, whether it's IndyCar, Formula One, NASCAR, like the drivers are out there to race. They're not really driving to impress you or me. They're driving to race. I mean, they love the fan support, don't get me wrong, but the fans are it's the fans and television is what puts the money on the table for them. That's why there's so many sponsors in the sport, because of television stuff. Nobody would really want to watch the sport if it was just a bunch of blank stock cars driving around, no number, no anything. But I think I'm definitely way on the safety side, though, so I can agree with Ben's statement, absolutely, with safety and how it was. But with entertainment, it's just unfortunate. Like, if you really look into how some races have finished, like, I remember Ben mentioned as advertised. The thing I disagree about that is, so technically that means, like, Dale Earnhardt Sr. would have won the Daytona 497.5 because they had the race back because of the caution coming out. Like, if that didn't come out, it could be Daytona 500. Obviously, saying that more is just a little fun thing because he definitely earned that win. Don't get me wrong. But, I mean, for me personally, as somebody who watches it, I would rather see the race end under whether they pass the white flag and then a caution comes out, or have the caution come out so they can do restarts. I think the unlimited is a little excessive because, like Ben had mentioned as well, with part issues, especially in the Cup Series and supply and demand, there's a lot more demand than there is supply. So when you're wrecking all these cars costing millions and millions of dollars just to go like maybe 2 miles on a super speedway, I just don't think that's right. I think they should go back to limiting it to maybe like 3, because I like the races, Daytona 500, the Coke 0600. I don't want to see, just like Ben, the Coke 0615, maybe the Coke 0605, 606, so maybe some Daytona 500 and 2.5. But yeah, it gets excessive. I will admit that. But I think many people that when you go to social media after the race, whether, like Ben said too, whether it's the driver they wanted to win or the driver they didn't want to win, everyone's just going to have a different feeling about it just because of who probably crosses the finish line first. Like favorite drivers in my past have benefited from this rule, absolutely, where a caution has come out or where a caution has not, or where it's ended under caution. I have so many thoughts going through my mind. I'm having so much fun with you guys. But yeah, so I've had drivers benefit from it too. But I feel like in terms of specifically NASCAR has been on what I think is a downhill slope compared to, you've seen the rise of Formula One. I did a research paper my final year at Utica University about NASCAR films and their trends just completely went downhill, and how other things, Formula One, like Rush, have gone up. I feel like in terms of American motorsport, NASCAR needs to be different. That's why I feel like they should have a rule where they finish on the green. But the whole Ryan Blaney thing during the All-Star race was stupid. I felt so bad they threw the caution. He was like 10 feet from the finish line when they threw that. So I recommend you watch the reunion on YouTube. There's a 2-part series. They're about like 20 minutes apiece. It has like Bubba Wallace, Ryan Blaney, Daniel Suarez, Corey LaJoie, Kyle Larson, all guys who grew up racing talk about that. And it's a really fun thing to watch, see how much these guys really are like a close family. But yeah, that was stupid about what happened to Ryan Blaney back then. I'm still not over that. I was watching it in the car. But yeah, that's how I stand. But so I do have a question for Ben. Can I throw it back to him here?
Yeah, go for it.
Sounds good to me. So Ben, I mentioned many times I really do like how you feel about this. I think it's a very great argument. But I wanted to ask you, when you were talking, it sounded like more you were based on like super speedways, because you mentioned Daytona, Talladega. Do you feel like the rules should be different depending on the track, whether it's a super speedway like Daytona or Talladega or a short track? And then road courses are obviously much different. It might be hard to clean them up. I just wanted to know your take about if you feel strongly about all 36 races during the season having the same rule, or do you think they should split it up since there's a variety of size in the tracks?
Well, super speedways are just the most notable examples that I can think of that pop into my head here. And of course, obviously, the pack racing makes late accidents and specifically big accidents more likely. But, I can think of a couple other examples as well. We've been through the mess of the Indianapolis road course the last couple of years, specifically last year when the curb came up. And, that was kind of a race that got to be quite a bit of a mess in the closing laps there. So it can happen anywhere. Specifically when it comes to safety, I think if NASCAR is going to double down on unlimited attempts, there needs to be an exception for only one attempt for super speedways. If we're going to die on this overtime hill or green flag finish hill or whatever it is, just from a safety perspective there. And I do, I'm glad to hear it. You share my concerns, and I do see both sides of it, because I understand that the fans pay a lot of money to come out to these races, and they want to see a green flag finish, and I want to see that green flag finish just as much as anybody else. But I don't want to sacrifice, in my mind, the integrity of the sport in order to get to that point. That's not a hill that I'm willing to die on. So that's kind of where I stand on that. I think that obviously super speedways present a much bigger safety concern, but at the same time, me, I'm all for consistency. This is something that I can say in regards to all 36 races, no matter what the track is.
Absolutely fantastic and great points from both of you there. And interesting that the 2022 season we just had, there was only 8 races that ended in overtime, and only one of them in the playoffs as well. But I do understand that, Ben, you have a question for Matthew, who's down here. So swinging it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I'll throw it back to Matthew as well here. I know you brought up that word entertainment, which, I must confess, I'm not a particularly big fan of that word. But like I said, I do respect where you're coming from, and I know that there are valid arguments to be had on both sides here. But I guess my question to you is just how far do we go? How far are we willing to go to prioritize that entertainment? And at what point in doing so do we begin to sacrifice the integrity of the sport, like I mentioned?
I mean, definitely. I feel like since there has not been a fatal injury in the top 3 series of NASCAR since 2001, and then these rules were obviously implemented after the fact. Granted, we have had some bad injuries like Ryan Newman with his wreck at Daytona, which you had made some great points about, absolutely. But I feel like with entertainment, they have done, I think, I mean, their ratings have not done as well, obviously, which I mentioned, but that's why I feel like they need to be a little different in terms of this. But I think you do make a great point. When do we begin to sacrifice the integrity? I think once that would be considered a sacrifice is when an injury occurs during a race and we know it occurs, but yet they continue to race after an injury. We've just been lucky enough to have no fatal injuries in the sport, knock on wood. We got worried a lot this year, especially with this next gen car. We were all very worried at some of these super speedway, not at the first Daytona, but then after we saw Kurt Busch back into the wall at Pocono, I feel like we're all like, oh crap, this Talladega was the scariest thing. I just wanted it to be over, to be honest with you. So safety is definitely, like I said, a concern, but I think it begins to sacrifice it when we see someone actually get like really injured and they continue to race. But that's why I just think the main point besides entertainment is NASCAR needs to be different if they want to do something. I think my opinion on the Formula One rule for this is a little different, especially since Abu Dhabi last year. That was one of the first Formula One races I really got to watch. And I was like, what is this? And I said so many expletives when there was not an 8-time world champion and said it was a first-time world champion. I know you guys are going to discuss that a little bit, but I think it all depends on, I like also precedent, then I'll stop talking. I like when there's something that has been set in place and they follow it. NASCAR, like Ben said, is very inconsistent. And we like consistency. I can agree with that with him. We like consistency. NASCAR is not consistent by any stretch of the imagination. So with these rules, I feel like one thing is they have been consistent is with this Green-White-Checkard or NASCAR over time. So that's why I'm okay with it. If it changes, am I going to do anything about it? No, because I'm still going to watch it, whether they decide that the Daytona 500 only needs to be 500 miles or if it could go to 525 miles. So that's really up to NASCAR to decide. But I think that was a great question. And I think Ben also made some very great points.
Well, and if I can just follow up real quickly, you talk about the ratings decline. I just want to point out that I think that ratings decline really started in the mid-2000s. When did this rule change come into effect? It was the mid-2000s, and it came into effect with playoffs and a whole host of other things as well. So maybe it's just a coincidence that this rule was one of those things, but I think that's another important thing to consider as well there.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I've never even heard of, in the past 12 months, F1 and consistency from stewards. I mean, I have not heard that in a very long time, my word. They've got to do something right. They're still making mistakes, even last time out in Brazil, but we'll get onto that at another time. We've got a couple of comments through in the chat room as well, again, from Auto Rocking Racing 94. I understand as well, Ben, you know, as well. So welcome along. The Piggott crash also brought some pointers. Daylight was going to become an issue, and if they red flagged it, how would they enter the pits? People tend to forget that IndyCars must come to pit road. Excellent point there as well, because it was the crash at the entrance to the pit lane where, as you said, it destroyed the tyres. That was protecting the concrete barrier, so ironically drivers wouldn't smash into that at an angle. So they were sort of left with one arm tied behind their back. They could have stopped them on the track. We've seen that happen before in other series like NASCAR 2012 Daytona 500. They stopped the drivers on the track when the fire came down the turn 3 with the fire truck as well. So
I think yeah, I think what Luis is saying is because Indy cars are single seaters, they need the mechanics to reactivate the engines from the rear. But if they'd stopped them on track, it would have taken a lot longer to do that. It's much easier when they bring them down pit road and all the mechanics are right there to be able to do that. So I think that's what Luis was getting at there. Is
it wide enough for Indy to get all the cars down without accident? Because I think the pit entrance is actually now is down, doesn't it?
Well, that was part of what complicated it, because it happened right at the entrance there. So I mean, it would have been a long, tedious process, and with only 4 laps to go, I think they probably made the wise decision to just call it there.
I wonder also how many of that was playing the fact that there wasn't actually thousands of fans. It was a TV-only event. Yeah, because why red flag it for the fans when they were all watching on TV? And I doubt they wanted to sit around watching and what would have been 45 minutes of track cleanup. So that was a very unique one with COVID. Okay, leaving NASCAR for a time, as we know they have rules set on this, but one series that doesn't is Formula One. In 2021, Formula One saw a late safety car and a red flag at Baku for the Max Verstappen crash with a puncture on the start-finish straight as well. Max was the second car to see the right rear tyre fail and crash on the fast and long stretch as well. Under the F1 red flag rules, the race director can call the event official or have a restart period. Instead, the race was restarted with the 2-lap shootout with Perez taking the win. Lewis leaving his brake magic on and going straight on at the first corner as well was either much hilarity or much despair, depending on which side of the Twitter war you want to be on. That's another topic for another time. Mark Webber is also proving that he can do the high voice as well, screaming down there as well. And even I in the past have been criticised of going ultrasonic, but I can't get as high as Mark Webber can. That Aussie vocal cord really going there. But the red flag wasn't used at Abu Dhabi, and we ended with the now infamous safety car coming in early and the lap cars not being in the correct order mess. So for one good idea to not being executed poorly as well, I'm going to start with Daniel here on this. Should F1 adopt a formal rule about the red flag coming out to attempt a green flag finish?
First of all, let me say that it was absolutely fascinating to hear from the NASCAR point of view what happens, and in my opinion, from a European perspective, I see the Green-White-Checkard or these red flags being thrown for a kind of a more entertainment purpose, a little bit more accepted when it's on an oval, for example, compared to our sports here in Europe. For maybe because we think that somehow it is more part of the DNA of oval racing. While here, actually, it is something that has been that was never considered until quite lately. As you mentioned, the Abu Dhabi incident last year was quite a big moment for Formula One, and ironically, there was a much clearer rule before Abu Dhabi than now, because of course the regulation has now been changed, because now the race director, which by the way is not every weekend the same this year, has more freedom to call the race or to restart the race. While actually last year we had the 75% rule. So if there was a red flag with the race over to 75% of the race distance, it was called the end. So it was a much clearer rule at that point. So let me say that also the Abu Dhabi situation, I think it was the correct decision and not to red flag the race, because in my opinion the red flag is really a safety issue. So that if there is an incident that you need to intervene with the red flag, is either because of the safety of the driver or the marshals, for example, or because the track is completely blocked and the rest of the pack cannot continue. And so this is why probably in oval racing that is more acceptable in my opinion, because of course when there is an incident, when there's a crash, it's obviously the track is blocked, while on road courses or on tracks that we use over here, it's not always the case. So that is kind of my opinion. I would like to stress out that that specifically for Formula One, for example, there is also an entertainment value there, because of course the public doesn't want to see ending under safety car. But for example, I cover a lot of Formula 4 or Formula 3 or junior single seaters, but also GT racing and touring cars, and it happens every weekend. I don't see where does the problem of ending the race on the safety car conditions. So it's quite normal, and as also highlighting what Ben said, if the race distance is set, This is also a lot depending on the championship, because, for example, if you have a refueling or not, if you have a strategy coming in or not, you cannot always go over time, for example, here in Europe, because there is some kind of strategy with some championship that do not have refueling, so you cannot go a lot more overtime. But yeah, this is kind of the point that I want to stress out. I kind of feel that the red flag is really a safety issue. So if either for the driver or for the marshals, and except for these extreme situations, you throw in a safety car or a virtual safety car. It also depends a lot on how the track marshal are working, because, for example, in tracks like Monaco, where they are extremely fast, you don't even need any interruptions of the race most of the time if the track is not blocked completely. But while some other tracks you might require longer time. For example, we've seen the Monza situation this year in Formula One, where also the marshals. Well, I think it was not kind of the marshal issue, more of a race director issue that kind of messed up with the old lapped cars, and which was also the problem last year in Abu Dhabi, more than the red flag itself, in my opinion. So when first of all, you need consistency. So also this is something that has been said before, and you really want consistency in a championship. But in my point of view, I don't see a problem with the race ending under safety car conditions, and red flag should be used for kind of extreme safety situations.
Absolutely, and I'm going to look forward to hearing what Joe's going to say now, as well as you hand over to you.
When it comes to the FIA, F1, and consistency, we talk about how quite a lot of times it's not the most consistent. I feel if there was to be a rule that said if we had a safety car, full safety car situation, or even maybe a virtual safety car situation between 10 to 5 laps to go, red flag to try to ensure 4 laps at least under green flag. With that said, I think if we had something like that in Abu Dhabi, as soon as we saw that crash with Latifi and Schumacher, all the teams would have known what was going to happen, because at the red flag situation there, they could change the setup of the cars. They could change the tires. They could have the perfect setup for that short sprint, unless they do a mistake like Lewis Hamilton in Baku and left the magic on. For me, I feel that is more a better way than having it where it's at the discretion of the race director, where you don't know, where the teams don't know, the fans don't know. The fans are hopeful they see the race resume, or they're going to be bummed that there is no race resume. If they know, I think full hand, okay, this crash occurred, we're going to throw the red flag, we're going to have a shootout for the finish. I think that delivers on the excitement. It delivers on the consistency, and I think that's going to be really something that should be looked at if they are going to go down that route and see what they can do. Because overall, when it comes to Formula One, I think it's very unfortunate that the 2021 season, all that build-up, all the hype, all season long for this last race, and the race director trying to ensure a green flag finish, didn't exactly follow the rule book as written, and we still have fans discussing it, debating it. Was Max really worthy of the championship? Was Lewis robbed? And it's just a sloppy way to end such a phenomenal year-long battle. And now the following year, Max Verstappen just dominates the season. Just really makes me think that it was a big missed opportunity. And unfortunately, I think for F1, probably looking back and just wishing it had gone a lot better. I do support the idea if there was some sort of rule to allow the red flag to be displayed and be consistent enough, and that hopefully could be at least one area they'll be consistent with.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been 12 months now, and it was still discussing 2021. It'll never leave us as well. It's like Freddie from what was it, Friday the 13th? That's Jason. Which one's the Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that as well? Or Michael Myers will just keep popping back up like a bad dream as well. But still, we're going to have a very interesting discussion throughout the remainder of this, and we've got a free topic coming up as well, which I'm sure Abu Dhabi will get brought up sometime as well when we have our 3 comments later. Matthew's in our own chat has come in as well, saying as well, while he's been talking his NASCAR segment, I was going to talk F1. He says, I'm still mad that Hamilton is not an 8-time champion because of that horribly inconsistent call that would have made Max's championship this season way more valuable. They changed the rule mid-race. Absolutely. And they forgot about Yuki Tsunoda last time out as well. So much for the new FIA system for making sure that everybody who was lapped gets unlapped. They gave the explanation, though, that because Tsunoda went into the pit lane, the system bugged and registered that he actually did unlap himself, but he didn't because he got passed again. It's all very confusing. But I like to give this opportunity now because Joe, I believe, has a follow-up question for Daniel.
Yeah, I know that you were talking about the junior categories, GT. We don't see this kind of discussion. Of course, the fan numbers Formula One's gained compared to the other series much greater. So I'm curious, if the FIA was to adopt a red flag rule for Formula One, do you think other series in Europe, the junior series like Formula 2, Formula 4, Formula Regionals, GT, do you think they might follow suit if the FIA was to introduce such a rule?
I think that's quite a good question because so far we haven't seen that. So we mainly because it's more sports than entertainment. Because of course there's not much public and not much TV audience as Formula One. So the entertainment value of Formula One is much more important compared to the junior series, where it is mainly just sport. You know, the drivers are really just competing to advance through the ranks, and so it's they. You know, I think the regulations are followed much more closely in junior and GT, for example, or for example also in endurance series. It happens sometimes there are different regulations, not for red flags, but specifically for if you can pit in caution, under caution or not. You know, these kind of rules are sometimes different. But I do not specifically think that a rule change for Formula One will change also for many of the other junior categories, simply because of the entertainment value for F1. It's taken more into account than for the other series. But for example, we have seen the safety car rules change for when they changed for Formula One. Every time that there's a car off track, the safety car comes out in order for the marshal to recover the car. That has also affected the other series, but that is specifically for safety reasons rather than for entertainment reasons. So this is, I think, the main difference here.
Absolutely, as well. And we've talked about the NASCAR system in place. F1 not having a system in place, but potentially might have an unofficial system. Now we go to the one you've all been waiting for as well. We go to IndyCar, which, similar to NASCAR in the 90s, sort of has a system in place. And we start off with 2014 at the Indianapolis 500. An unprecedented red flag was thrown to set up a 7-lap shootout. Ryan Hunter-Reay was the leader and he went on to win the race, but the team owner, Michael Andretti, was not happy about the red flag rule. 2020, the race ended under caution when the caution came out with 5 laps remaining. We discussed that earlier on in the program. And 2022, the red flag came out, setting up a 3-lap shootout, but ended under caution still when Sage Karam crashed. I remember because I got my pick a winner right with Marcus Ericsson. Yeah, hey. Considering on lap 195 in 2020, the race ended under caution, 2022, lap 195, a quick red flag for a 3-lap shootout. And no official rule in the books of a procedure when a red flag comes out. 2022, Marcus Ericsson led before and after the red flag, still won the race. Pick a winner points for me. Thank you very much. And looked like a genius, I'd like to point out. But infamously, the year before at Detroit by Isle, he won when Will Power's car overheated when the red flag came out, setting up a 4-lap dash to the finish. So Power had a lost race due to the red flag being waved. Ironically, the 2 years Will Power won the IndyCar Championship, the Indy 500 had a late red flag period. Matthew, starting with you, is IndyCar flirting with a very messy situation And if you were in charge, put your big cap on now, what rules would you introduce?
I mean, putting me in charge of IndyCar almost seems like putting me in charge of the FIA, because also like me, I don't know, or just like them, I don't know what I'm doing. So
You can't do a worse job.
I mean, that'd be fun to be in a position like that when I could just make decisions and get yelled at Twitter but have no real consequences. I mean, that would be a really fun.
Be fine.
Also, everyone, please take that with a grain of salt. I do not watch Formula One or IndyCar as much as the other people in this chat, so please take what I say differently. But I think it's tough because the way I look at it is between open wheel racing and stock car racing. I feel like NASCAR, with their safety, what it has been since 2001, I feel like allows you more of that like entertainment, allows you to race green, white, checker. But when in terms of open wheel cars, it's just so incredibly dangerous. And we've seen fatal incidents within the past 5-6 years for, I believe, both motorsports, something along the lines like that. And that's very worrisome to have some big accident and still have them like race along the lines. But I like more of like what you were mentioning with, I don't like the idea of what happened in 2020, to be honest with you. Granted, I didn't see the race, but with there's 5 laps remaining and then a caution coming out to end the race, even though you can drive to get to that, say 500 miles, just the idea of having 5 laps of just complete nothing, just very slow pace finishing the race, just doesn't sit well with me. As someone say that was my first like full race watching, I'd be like, is this really how they end? I'd be like that stereotypical fan, kind of like Formula One last year with Abu Dhabi. I'm like, is this really how they all end? This is dumb. But now I really do love this. I love motorsport. I feel like it's definitely grown on me since then. But I do like the idea of what in 2022, what happened with a quick red flag for like a shootout at the end of a race. Unfortunately, though, like you had mentioned, with Detroit, when a car overheated during the red flag. Unfortunately, I hate to be that guy, but things happen. And that just seems like one of those things that just did not go his way on that day. Where that happened, like I know in NASCAR recently, there were a few late race cautions. I can't think of the race this season because, I mean, that they were just all so different. Like we loved it or hated it. We wanted to get rid of the entire sport. We wanted the sport to have more races, etc. But when Kyle Busch just during a caution flag, like I think his engine blew up. I think was that Darlington? Because somebody knows. Was it Darlington? So just things like that just happen. Like if the race went green flag any longer, maybe he would have made it longer. But unfortunately, just when cautions come out, certain bad things can happen. I guess is this my attitude to have. But I guess if I were to have the thinking cap on, the official polo, whatever they wear, I think I would kind of lean more towards like if a caution comes out with more than 2 or 3 to go, then red flag and start. But if it's under that like 2 or 3 lap threshold where it takes the cars to get around, then I think you can end the race. I think you have to look at Formula One's unofficial system more. Now I'm talking so fast, I'm combining words, folding them. But I think if you have to look more at Formula One's system in terms of making a final decision on how to treat in a situation like this, rather than NASCAR solely based on, I think a big one is just safety of the drivers and the risk that they take. I think these are both most dangerous sports that we'll ever see. Don't get me wrong, but I think you're taking more of a risk in open wheel vehicles than you are in stock cars. So I think you have to lean more towards Formula One's unofficial system with this one. I got all those words out now. I'll stop talking. So thank you for letting me speak on that.
I saw you were going with that as well, with symptom, how to treat it as well. So I saw you were going with that one. Don't worry, I'll piece it together. Daniel, throwing it over to you now.
I think Matthew really brought up a good point in comparing IndyCar with open wheels and stock cars. You know, in my opinion, it's if we have to talk about IndyCar, it's more about the oval versus the road courses. In my view, it is kind of more acceptable on ovals if you have to red flag at the end of the race for a caution. While in my opinion, on the road course, it wouldn't make any sense. It would be okay to finish under caution, in my opinion. What I really do not like is when they're lapping for many laps in slow pace. as we wait for the race director to have a decision. That's what I do not particularly like. If the red flag is thrown immediately, and I understand the reason immediately, that's quite fine. Even though I'm quite I agree also with Ben when he says, for example, the 500 is the 500, it's not the 501. So race distance is kind of important in that situation. But for me, really, it's about the pace when the race director really takes the decision. So it is kind of okay if the decision is immediate, and so you know all the audience behind the TV really knows what's happening. While it's more frustrating for the audience when you think that it's going under caution, and then they stop it and then they restart, but that's quite messy, and it kind of gets the impression that in race director they've lost the plot and they don't know what they're doing. So, but when there is a kind of a consistent rule, and you can see what is happening, you understand what is happening on an oval. For me, it's a little bit more acceptable to red flag when even with a few laps to go.
I always love how your room looks like it's daytime. Just side right in there as well. It looks fantastic. Great points as always. Ben, I'm looking forward to your monologue as always.
Well, let me say this. Obviously, I'm still not a fan of it. But frankly, I will take what IndyCar has done in the past of the Indianapolis 500 over what NASCAR does with unlimited attempts, because again, bare minimum, it's still the Indianapolis 500-mile race. You're not artificially extending the distance to do so. But I do remember not just Michael Andretti, Kurt Busch was doing the double in 2014, and there were concerns about the timing of him trying to get to Charlotte for the 600. So that was another interesting wrinkle that was thrown into that year. But it is still a messy situation, and I think that a lot of times, like what happened to Will Power at Detroit, you can say that's racing, you can say these kinds of things happen, but enough of those things happen in this sport that I feel like there's an argument to be made. What can we do to try to minimize the risk of that happening? And again, when you bring everybody down, and Will Power's the leader, so he's got to wait the longest for everybody to get into pit road before they shut all the cars off and then refire. So, the engine just sitting there, maybe that makes his car the most likely to have an overheating issue and not be able to get going again. Is there something we can do to mitigate that risk of an unpredictable, out of anybody's control thing happening to somebody who would have probably gone on to win the race, or at least certainly finish in the top three, as Will Power would have done in that particular instance. So, again, not a huge fan of it. I'll still take it over the unlimited attempts that we see in NASCAR and ARCA for overtime finishes. But I do think it is a very, very messy situation. And if IndyCar were to try to, work around that with their own sort of green flag finish rule, I think you'd get a very mixed reaction from the fans either way.
Absolutely. Joe, what have you got to add to the conversation? What would you change? What would you introduce to make things more exciting?
If I was in charge of the IndyCar during the off season, I'll make the announcement of this is our rule, our procedure for late cautions and using the red flag to ensure we get at least one attempt. As we mentioned, the 2022 Indianapolis 500, he brought out the red flag, he got the field going, but then there was a caution, ended the race. I feel it'll look comical if we start having, we got to throw a second red flag, trying to get another attempt at the green flag finish. One and done. Because at the end, this is something where the Indianapolis 500, I think almost all of us will agree. We don't want the day where it's like, it's the Indianapolis 502 because of an overtime rule. I don't think we want that. IndyCar, they can refuel, unlike Formula One, where they can't refuel, so they can't really extend the race distance. Overall, I know people have been talking about a red flag rule when it comes to IndyCar. I would say looking at 7, maybe 5 laps, because this isn't NASCAR. You got open wheel, especially in the ovals at Indianapolis. Do we really want 20 plus open wheel cars entering that first corner, all trying to win the biggest sport, the biggest race in their sport? That could be very, very dangerous. We don't want a repeat of what happened in Las Vegas with Dan Wilden. We want the drivers to be safe. We want a good race. I think you got to look at a longer period. You can't have a 5-lap, not a 3-lap shootout, especially. I mean, that 3-lap shootout, we saw the crash with Sage Karen. Overall, I think IndyCar, the consistency is very important. Cost of willpower. He had to sit there, let the car run, waiting for the back. How do you know if it was the teammate's second place and you got another teammate further back? Hey, slow down, take your time, get pit row. So that would make the leader could burn up the engine and then help your teammate get the win. IndyCar has to do something. Overall, IndyCar, I feel they got a good position they are right now. It's the off season. We're not talking about mid-season change. The race director just, I feel we should try this. Do it now so that we know what's going to happen in 2023. And please, whatever, I think all of us will agree, don't make the Indy 500 have overtime.
Absolutely. I think we'll all agree with that one as well. I think we've all reached some agreements as well. It's quite weird. Usually we all disagree with each other, or someone's got a different opinion, but we've all got similar thoughts on where to go forward. That's something. Someone note that down. But this is one thing I'll be looking forward to as well. Open debate time as well. One question for us all to answer as well. Even I get to chime in eventually as well, but I can dictate who goes and who wears as well. So this can be a lot of fun. So sit back and relax and watch the chaos. One question. Is using the red flag or overtime good for motorsport? And by the random draw, first up is Daniel.
Well, for me, overtime is really a big no, because of course I've not followed NASCAR as much as you guys have. I mostly because it's quite late here. I tried to follow, especially the track series, for example, last year, but it for me it's a no. The overtime, it's a big no. The red flag is kind of, as I explained before, sometimes it is more acceptable for European motor racing. In my opinion, I'm leaning more towards no. It's but as everything that I stand by everything that I've explained before. For the red flag, sometimes it is kind of more acceptable, but for me the overtime is a big no, because it's kind of random. It feels kind of random, and then every time it extends the time for either the TV audience. For example, the track series I was trying to follow, it was going to with so many cautions. It was going at 4 a.m. for me, so it was kind of that didn't make any sense. But red flag, I'm more, I'm less of a black and white situation. But for me, the overtime, it's a no in motorsport.
I tend to balance always in the middle. That's why I'm hosting. But I do agree. Overtime, I never think works as well. It's too much of a weird thing to comprehend. I think touring cars had a great idea as well. Here in the UK, British touring cars, if the safety car comes out, there's a maximum of 3 laps that get added to that race's duration. So say the safety car's out for 2 laps, 2 laps get added on out of the 3. If it's out for 1 lap, only 1. If it's out for 4 laps, only 3 laps get added to the race distance. So the cars are fueled for 3 extra laps, and the fans still get some racing. So that's looking good. But it's a tricky one to negate that as well, because you can't say you don't know how many laps we're going to have in Formula 1 under safety car or other sports as well. Like at the final fuel stop in NASCAR, do we fill them up an extra couple of laps to ensure that? They always do it. But is that going to be made mandatory? Because we're always going to have this. It's a weird situation. So Daniel's brought up a brilliant point. Who else wants to fly in here as a sort of a random open topic? Because the script's now been torn up, really. So it's going to be quite a lot of fun. So who wants to go next? Put your hand up and... there we go. Go on, Matthew.
So after, I want to answer a little bit, and then I want to ask a question to follow up with you guys as well. So I think it's going to depend on the sport, really. Like just talking, just even backstage with you guys as well and on the show. I think in terms of NASCAR and IndyCar needs to be different. So I think for overtime, I feel can be good for NASCAR in terms of ratings and stuff like that. IndyCar is that more in the middle, like, yeah, I don't know, like what Joe mentioned, even though he was on my side about it earlier, it sounded like what he made a great point that doesn't really agree with what I said, but I can agree with what he said about IndyCar. I don't really want to see a 3-lap shootout either now thinking about it because of open wheel. But then Formula One, I think, is way different solely because they don't fuel up during the race. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they fuel up during the race. Okay. So for them to have I know a lot of cars. This is another thing that I'm learning to educate myself with Formula One is if it's a 55 lap race, but there's projected safety cars, a lot of guys, in order to lose the amount of weight in their car and not allow them to travel faster, don't put that much fuel in the car expecting to save fuel throughout the very lengthy race because there's no stages in Formula One. So I feel like if you started adding like a green-white-checkered in that sport, kind of mess up a lot of things where you would probably see somebody who doesn't finish near the podium end up getting maybe a top 5 earning points that they probably wouldn't have unless a caution or a red flag, something would to come out. So that's how I feel about that. So NASCAR is like a yes, IndyCar is like a I don't know. And then for Formula One, I think we shouldn't have that. I think the way Formula One is, I didn't really like Abu Dhabi for both reasons, just because they made the decision mid-race, like not mid-race, more like the last couple seconds of the race. They're like, let's do this instead. That is for entertainment. I think that worked, but it just went against everything they said. I do have a question, but I saw Ben, I think you raised your hand if you want to answer that. And then I do have a question in the chat room too.
Yeah, well, just to follow up on your point of refueling, I just also want to bring this up as well. If there's ever a case of like an aborted start where somebody stalls on the starting grid or something, or they have to do another formation lap in Formula One, the car's fueling is so, or everybody's fueling is so precisely calculated that they'll actually take a lap off of the race distance. So a 55 lap race becomes a 54 lap race because you've done one formation lap, you've used 1 lap's worth of fuel, granted you're under a slower pace, obviously, on the formation lap, but that's how precise it is. So if you were to say, okay, we're going to do a green-white-checkered in F1 to get a green flag finish here, everybody would run out of fuel because the calculations are so precise that, you know, to extend laps onto a race would just completely mess everything up. So that's why I say, you know, it would take a major regulation change to bring refueling back, which again, I think would definitely really divide the fan base because there were some problems with refueling the last time it was in Formula One. So that would have to be the case if you were to even consider implementing an overtime style rule when it comes to F1 or IndyCar. And I guess I'll pass it back up to you. I have some more points, obviously, I want to bring up, but I understand you had a follow-up question as well. So we can all go full screen here and leave that open-ended to you.
Yeah, so I think that's also a great point. See, I'm learning about all these sports as we talk every week, and I absolutely love it. So I think this is going to go on the variety that we just talked about. My question is, do you think that motorsports, so any of them from Formula One to NASCAR to IndyCar, and then speaking of all the other series in terms of fueling and stuff like that, do you think these rules should all be similar, or do you think it's good and they can continue to have that variety? Because like I know Formula One, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know how many sports will take laps off of the race to ensure because of strategy. Like, could you imagine if NASCAR, I'm trying to think, the Xfinity 500 at Martinsville, the one Ross Chastain made so famous, could you imagine if they couldn't fuel up and it became the Xfinity 497, something like that? So I just want to ask how you guys felt about, do you think we should continue to have variety, or do you think all motorsports should kind of base their ideas and have one thing that's quite similar to one another? That's kind of a lot of words. So if you want to just read it in the chat and then answer what I said there.
I'll take it if nobody else wants to jump in here. But yeah, well, I think, you know, obviously it's all motorsport at the end of the day, but obviously, you know, it's like the apples and oranges comparison, right? They're both fruits, and that's where the similarities end. You know, most of these cars have 4 tires and a steering wheel. But then again, we cover MotoGP here on this channel, so you know, I suppose that you know, you even find more differences there. I was going to say most of the cars we cover have 4 tires and a steering wheel, and that's where the similarities end. That's not even the case with some of these series here. So, you know, while it's all the same sport, you know, at the end of the day, I think we do have to acknowledge that what works for one series is not necessarily going to work with another just because they are so different. So, you know, I don't know if extending the race to get a green flag finish is something that, you know, would work better in one series or another. I would probably be on the side of, I don't think it's necessary anywhere we look at things. And I guess this follows up, this brings me to the point that I wanted to make here in kind of this open segment. And I'll just throw a rhetorical question out to everybody here. What is the purpose of overtime in stick and ball sports, for example? The purpose of overtime is to break a tie at the end of regulation. Now, in motorsports, you're timing down to 1,000th of a second, or in some cases, even a 10,000th of a second here. I can't really recall a time. I mean, maybe in the era before electronic timing and scoring, but when was the last tie in a NASCAR race? When was the last time you had a tie in a Formula One race? So when you talk about the purpose of overtime or the purpose of extra innings in baseball or stoppage time in soccer or football, if you're in Europe, I know we have two people from Europe on the show tonight, but you all know what I mean, right? Like, well, the purpose there is to break a tie. It's a necessary rule to have in your sport. Whereas in motorsports here, the purpose of overtime seems to be entertainment based. We want to give the fans a green flag finish. This is an avenue that allows us to increase the chances of that happening. And again, like I said, I'll take the red flag over artificially extending the race. But again, and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've both been on this side as well. The red flag should really only be used when it's necessary for safety purposes. And
I've been on that side, yeah.
Yeah, and when Jimmy Johnson crashed on the closing laps at Indy this year, and that brought out the red flag, ironically, his Ganassi teammate Marcus Ericsson was the one affected by it. Fortunately for him, he went on to win the race anyway, but Johnson's crash was not a crash that would have necessitated a red flag had it happened on lap 62 or a random lap in the middle of the race. But because it happens at the end of the race, they want a green flag finish in Indianapolis. They throw the red flag to make sure there are enough laps left when it comes time for the restart after the cleanup in order to get there. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of that. And again, that this is where Abu Dhabi gets really messy, because I don't think Nicholas Latifi's crash in the closing laps at Abu Dhabi would have necessitated a red flag either. Obviously it didn't, because they didn't bring one out. And then we got the mess with the 1 lap shootout. And again, that just opens up a whole other can of worms. But, again, while it would have been a massive, massive bummer for last season, the epic fight between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen that we got to end under a 5-lap safety car period at Abu Dhabi, we wouldn't still be talking about it today, because there wouldn't have been all this controversy about only some of the cars being allowed to unlap themselves, and the fight for entertainment, and the Lewis Hamilton Team LH fans on Twitter going at the Max Verstappen stands, or whatever you want to call it. It's just been a complete nightmare for Formula One and their fans to continue to be pitted against one another, 11 or 12 months after the fact, because of how controversial it was. So again, from an entertainment standpoint, certainly it would have been a letdown, but from a sporting integrity standpoint, nobody would have been questioning Lewis Hamilton's 8th world championship in the same way they're questioning Max Verstappen's 1st. And I say that with absolutely no disrespect to Max Verstappen. It's not his fault. It's not Red Bull's fault that Michael Masi made the decisions that he made, and they took advantage of the situation. More power to them. But it didn't come without controversy, and it didn't come without some fans giving their title an asterisk, and I think that's a real shame.
Absolutely, as well. And I think it was all to stem from last year as well. That was sort of like F1's talking point for red flags and overtimes and everything as well. So it's still continuing on. I want to go back to the talk about the fuel and energy system as well. And it's actually, we haven't talked about Formula E on this broadcast, but Formula E last year did introduce a system where under the safety car, you had time added back to you, and instead of reducing the energy, because when they did reduce the energy under safety car periods, it created a mess at Valencia. And I want to go directly to Daniel and get Joe to comment on this as well, you two. Daniel, you can explain more, because it was just an absolute fiasco at Valencia, and they had to completely change the whole safety car procedure.
Yeah, exactly. I think that went through my mind when you were speaking about F1, when Ben was speaking about F1 not really able to extend the time because, of course, the fuel is so tight, the strategy is so tight that you can't even if you have to do a further formation lap, you really have to count down a lap. When Formula E last year tried more of a NASCAR, extending the time. Also for entertainment purposes, and it really ended up in a massive fiasco in Valencia, with all the cars running out of energy in the final laps. So, I mean, as we've seen, it doesn't really work for our series here in Europe most of the times.
Absolutely, as well. And Formula E has actually also removed the timing systems this season. They've reintroduced laps, but under the safety car, we'll still have laps sort of added in as well to bump up the safety car again. So that's still going to get there. Joe, throwing over to you, your take on all this situation with the Formula E lot and adding time back, reducing energy, then giving it back to the driver. It got confusing. They've now modernized it a lot more going into season 9.
Yeah, it got confusing, and that's the thing. When you have a confusing rule, does it really make the racing better for the fans? And especially when we're talking about these rules to ensure a green flag finish, an exciting finish. If we have complicated rules where the average fan is like, okay, so what's going on? There's a safety car. We're getting more time? We're not getting time? Are they going to throw the red flag? Or what's going on? That doesn't make the sport look that great either. I think, unfortunately, for Formula E, they sort of learned, okay, we need to rethink how we do this, because it didn't look that great when you have car after car after car running out of energy, because the series put themselves in a position where the drivers were going to just run out of energy out there. Last thing we would want is Formula One to, oh, we're going to do this change to try to get a better finish, and then you have car after car after car run out of fuel, and then, oh, and the Haas vehicle won because somehow they saved the most fuel. It'll make great headlines, but I think it'll make the sport look really bad. So overall, Formula E, I think they have to do something different, especially since they're electric cars. MotoGP, they don't refuel. That's motorcycle race. I think similar to IndyCar, I would not want to see some sort of overtime rule or a late race restart. I think we saw that a couple of years ago in Austria after that horrific crash where we saw the red flag. I felt that was still enough laps to where you could ensure a safe race and not just what we saw earlier this year when Taka Nakagami first corner took out 3-4 different riders. So that's something I think the safety aspect of each series. NASCAR, they could do a lot. They could beat them bang. They got defenders. Formula One, the nature of the track, they're going to get spread out like they did in Baku with that 2-lap shootout. IndyCar, the road courses, they don't advertise. It's not the Portland 100. It's the Portland Grand Prix. I feel maybe they want to explore a little bit with the overtime rule, but that's getting into another topic. But overall, all sorts of things. One question I was thinking of particularly, I know, Ben, you were mentioning about the red flag is only used if there's a safety concern, like, a big crash, you have to stop everybody. Here comes the rain. What if a series was to say, okay, we understand we don't want that. We're going to introduce, I don't know, the purple flag that will bring this out late in the race. Do you feel that's a good solution, or do you feel like that sort of comes off of a gimmick saying, oh, here comes this late caution, now they're going to throw the purple flag with, I don't know, the star on it, indicating that the race has halted to try to get one green flag finish.
That seems very gimmicky to me, and it's
there's the timer. That's the timer, so this will be the last question.
We
run out. Go on,
the last time a new flag was introduced, to my knowledge, it was the green and white checkered flag for stage racing in NASCAR. And, is stage racing a gimmick? I think, a lot of fans would probably say it is. I think that would really just, to me, be like a placeholder to determine what kind of red flag this is. But at the end of the day, it's a red flag. It's there to stop the race in the same way any other red flag is. And similarly, the green and white checkered flag, it marks the conclusion of something just as a regular checkered flag would. So I don't think a new flag would really be necessary here. I think if anything, it would really double down on the idea that this is a gimmick for entertainment purposes. And I think that might just further turn fans off from the idea.
I love what Matthew's put here. Orange, red and yellow equals orange. That's a brilliant idea as well. Right, we've reached the conclusion. We've run out of our 10 to 15 minutes of time. I said it for 15 because I knew this was going to be a bit of a long one to talk about as well. Brilliant, actually, from Daniel. Just put in that in the chat. In the 24-hour series, they did introduce a purple flag for code 60. That's when you have to go 60. Is it kilometers an hour or mile per hour?
Kilometers per hour. Yeah.
Fantastic. I didn't know that. That's cool. So we got a purple flag introduced. I hope we get to see that. Do we see that at Le Mans as well, or is that just the 24-hour endurance series?
So far, it's only the Creventic 24-hour series, but it's kind of different for Le Mans, but so far it's only in the 24-hour series.
I said no more questions. I've just asked the question. Oh, I'll get away with it. Thank you very much, Johnny. Okay, so interesting enough, actually, we were talking about late restarts as well. One thing that I read in the regulations today as well has been making the rounds. We had our last F1 meeting, and Formula One have decided to take off a lap before the DRS can be activated again after a restart of red flag, safety car, or at lights out. So after 2 laps, you can now use the DRS. What are they thinking going forward as well? If we restart with 2 to go, that means the DRS becomes available on the last lap of the race. They are just trying to help Max Verstappen get the championship at this point, aren't they? Oh, am I a cynic for saying that? Anyway, it's time for me to wrap up my segment as well. So my thanks to Joe, to Ben, to Matthew, and to Daniel as well for joining me. Hopefully at home we've sort of given you more information, and we've been able to help you with your own thoughts as well. Have anybody persuaded you? Please do get in touch with us and let us know in the comments as well. Have we persuaded you that it's a good idea to have overtime, or have we persuaded you it's a bad idea? We want to know. It's been an honour hosting the roundtable, first of many, I hope, coming over this winter break as well. Tomorrow we've got the grid pre-show as well. That's at 12 noon Eastern, and we've got on 90 minutes after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix on Sunday, we've got the Grid live wrap-up, and I think it's me, Ben, and Matthew. Are you there on Monday for the wrap-up show?
Not
Sunday. Wrap-up will be Sunday, right?
Oh, I meant encore. See, that's my brain going.
maybe. Well, I guess we'll see what happens, depending on if I get there. I don't know what time Abu Dhabi is. Do you guys know off the top of your head?
Only my time, which is 1 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in Europe.
It's 8 a.m. Eastern.
8 a.m. Eastern. There you go. Thank you, Ben.
Yes,
And if you allow me, shameless plug for the encore show on Monday. Primarily going to be an F2 show, recapping the Abu Dhabi weekend there, and I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about Logan Sargent, who I believe did pick up another super license point today in FP1. He completed over 100 kilometers there, so he continues to move closer to clinching that Williams seat for 2023 officially.
Absolutely. No shameless plug at all. It's all fantastic. Okay, that about does it for me. We're out of time. Both sides, you've done absolutely fantastic points as well. Thank you for your time, and I'll hand over to Joe.
Definitely a lot of fun. We encourage everyone, be sure to subscribe to the Grid Network right here on YouTube. Follow us on all the social media platforms. We're on tons of them. Starting, of course, with TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all over the place. You can find us, follow us everywhere. And then, of course, a big thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Come to show Mark and Robin for keeping us on the air. You too can invest in the Grid Network. I saw we're up to 432. Help us get to 500 before the Daytona 500. We'll love to get there. And buy me a coffee. Soon we'll be introducing some new goals on Buy Me a Coffee to get us to the racetrack for 2023. And, of course, you want to invest in the stock market, public.com. Use our referral code GRIDnet. Get free stock to start investing in the Grid Network. And overall, use the tools there to start learning how to invest in the stock market and get everything all started for you right there. Or Joshua Birch moderating tonight. Ben Schneider, Daniel from Racers goes behind the helmet, and of course encourage everyone to watch Women in Motorsports every Friday right here on YouTube. And Matthew Bro, I'm Joe San Diego. Thank you for watching today's show. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the races.
Don't be an anonymous investor. Join the stock market social media platform, public.com. Invest any amount of money and share with friends and new friends. Discover new opportunities, such as new companies and potential business partners, and useful tools for beginners, and share your experience with friends on public.com. Link in the video description gets you $5 for being a Grid Network viewer. Use the referral code GRIDnet for your free $5 to invest and start investing and networking on public.com.